Welcome back to The Beat. Concussions. We hear that injury so often associated with sports like hockey and football, but basketball is also dealing with its share, in particular this year in the NBA. Commissioner David Stern discussed concussions among players, and it came down to this as he addressed the media at All-Star Weekend: protection of these players.
Enforce the rules to protect the players. They're the most important asset that we have, and we recognize that there might be some pressure sometime in individual circumstances to accept a player's determination to go back into a game saying he was ready to do it and put himself at risk, and we're not going to do it.
So in essence, it's about saving players from themselves, because as competitors, they want to get back on the floor. But the NBA concussion policy includes players undergoing baseline testing during preseason. Diagnosed with a concussion, player not allowed to play until cleared by the NBA Director of Concussion Program, Dr. Jeffrey Kutcher. To gain clearance, a player must return to symptom-free baseline and complete a series of exertion tests. So that brings us to a very high-profile concussion that took place Sunday at the All-Star game 2 Sundays ago, and that was Kobe Bryant when struck by Dwayne Wade. But he was back and playing on Wednesday and wearing a mask and scoring 31 points. So, David, I guess he's like any other player. He has to pass a battery of tests, and if cleared, he's back on the floor, while some players have missed a series of games.
Yeah, I do think that, obviously people wonder, did Kobe just kind of walk past the doctor and say, I'm playing? And that's a fair, it's a fair argument to make. But you do have to take the calendar into consideration here. He did have 2 full days off between the All-Star game and the next time the Lakers played. All of the other players like Kyrie Irving, who suffered concussions this year, it happened during the season. And as we all know, there are very few days off during this season. So they would have to, by necessity, miss a few games, whereas Kobe was fortunate enough, if you want to put it that way, that he did get hit in the All-Star game, and he had 48, almost 72 hours to recover before the time he had to play again.
Yeah, Lang, I guess the most important thing is bigger picture. Now we are making sure that these players are evaluated and they are 100% healthy before going back to the court. Your thoughts?
Yeah, and I think the evaluation is something that's important that you don't really think about, because it's harder to be preventative in the NBA than it probably is in some of these other sports. As you mentioned earlier, Vince, hockey and football, baseball too, you wear helmets. In basketball, these guys are completely exposed. Their heads are wide open out there. And from that standpoint, it's really more about education and understanding the risks and the precautions you have to take before trying to go out there and play with a head injury.
Yeah, Sherrod, long term, we're seeing now from NFL players who, obviously it's more severe contact, but you can have some problems down the line. So this awareness is very important. What are you hearing up in your neck of the woods up in Boston?
Well, the Celtics are like every other team in that they are going to abide by this concussion rule. And they've had some guys who've had some neurological issues. Recently, Marquise Daniels, who's had, each of the past years, he's had some type of neck, upper torso type injury that, bordered on the line of being concussion-like. So certainly they're a little bit more aware than I think some were of the concussion situation. But my biggest concern with concussions, and you're starting to see, I think, some of the players, former players in the NFL speak out on this, is there's a certain physical nature, I should say, to professional sports. And as much as it's important to have an awareness of these type of injuries, if it gets to the point where you start legislating to prevent this, it can make the game, it can take something away from the game that I think no one really wants to see happen. But certainly the fact that we're so much more aware of concussions and ways to treat them, it's certainly that's a good thing. But let's not take it too far and start legislating, some of the physical play out of the game.
Yeah, that's a good point, Sherrod. And in terms of, look, these are elite athletes. They know their bodies and they know their performance levels. So, DA, I think you have to defer to the player to a certain extent, even if he's still in recovery mode.
Well, that's part of what David Stern was saying. That's the whole point of this policy, is that you're not going to defer to the player because the player is always going to want to play. Larry Bird hit his head on the court in a playoff game against Indiana and came back in the second half. The player is always going to say, I'm fine, let's go play. That's the whole point of the concussion policy, is to take the decision out, not only out of the player's hands, but out of the team's hands, because the team is always going to say, go ahead and play. This way, the league takes the bullet. The league is the one that says no until he passes what the league considers to be the proper baseline to return. That is why they put the concussion policy in place, because we saw guys coming back saying they were fine when they weren't really fine.
Yeah, safety first, and at least we're talking about it. There is an awareness, that's for sure. All right, we're going to be back to wrap things up in just a moment. 3 Points is next. Final thoughts from the panel here on The Beat.